Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining us for our professional development workshop in dance. And we've entitled it Dancing Across the Divide. And I'd like to introduce my longtime collaborator and friend, Shea. She is an instructor, an adjunct instructor at College of the Desert for many, many years. She teaches privately. She's had a long and storied career of her own as a professional dancer. And she's also the artistic director of the Palm Desert Choreography Festival. So I really enjoyed working with her over the years with dance teachers in Palm Springs Unified School District. And this year she's been kind enough to create this presentation on behalf of all of the dance teachers countywide. So take it away, Shea.
Okay, I feel like I should do a shuffle up to Buffalo as I begin. But anyway, I want to thank you for being such an advocate for the arts in general and also for dance, because that's what it's going to take. So I adore you. And there's my first gesture. We are looking at how to maximize this moment in time, because online, virtual learning, distance ed, whatever you want to call that, is not ideal for dance. It's been very challenging. I just lost my jazz class for the spring semester at the College of the Desert. And it's, it's that issue of who wants to take a jazz class online. And I'm teaching it out of my kitchen. So it's really tough for all of us. If you have a dance studio that does at least, help alleviate some of the issues. So I had given my questions to Louisa, who then gave them to her teachers, and these were the questions. We looked at kind of what is the overview of this moment, and so I'm not going to read these, but you can as you look at this slide.
And I think it's important to note that we got feedback from dance teachers ahead of this presentation, so that shaped the things.
No, I wanted to know what was going on in their world, because like I said, my class got canceled, so they probably have more experience at Zoom and all that. But as I got into the topics, I realized that first question, which I kind of put on top, which is how do we allow our students to understand the value of dance? And is it in this moment, it's been kind of devalued, and that's a double-edged sword, because it's devalued, but it's not all bad, because the pandemic has revealed the fact that we care about dance and we care about teachers. That's kind of an overview, not just dance teachers, but all teachers. And so it's like, I'm a water sign, forgive me, I'm a Scorpio like Louisa, and it's that idea that sometimes our power comes in damning. When you stop something, then all of a sudden you realize that it needs that flow, and how are you going to channel that? So that's the moment to me. So I'm going to go on as we look at all of these.
Okay, we lost your share screen.
Okay, then you need me to do that again. Okay. In a perfect world, it shouldn't have done that, but there we go. And I'm going to do sound too. Sorry. The technical issues of the world for dancer are always challenging, so I'm going to go back. Okay. So looking at just the overview of dance being devalued, I think what I found was a real positivity. It wasn't negative. Maybe we're in this moment that feels a little iffy, but the fact that we did see that performing arts are vulnerable, and that we have to make changes if we want the arts to be part of our society. And I think knowing that dance or other arts are the tools in which we make sense out of what we're experiencing. And boy, if we didn't need that this year, I don't know, another year, that would be better. This has been crazy. So anyway, that need for permanency and inclusivity, I think is really, really evident. The funding then and new directions to keep it there. One of the things that I will say is when you look at the unemployment in the arts, it's pretty bad. 52% for actors, but 55% for dancers. Dancers have been devastated by this year, and 27% of musicians. So, and this information is the NEA. But if you look at then waiters, who are our other essential workers, they were 27%. So that was tough for them too. If you look, our 55% is serious. So just in terms of an overview, I kind of added this little silly thing, which is I noticed that Russia has a hit TV show. It's called Grand Ballet, and they actually bring in dancers who actually do variations and ballet. So the fact that they embrace ballet culturally is critical. And even though it wasn't theirs originally, it was French, well, Italian and then French. It was this idea that they embraced then the classical ballet in the late 1800s. And so they've kind of adopted it. So they have this show called Grand Ballet, and we have this show called The Masked Dancer, which is kind of very American in my personal opinion of that. But on the good side, it's still dance.
I didn't know they had The Masked Dancer. I've seen The Masked Singer.
It's well, it's a takeoff on that. I don't know if it comes
okay.
from Japan or whatever, but Paul Abdul is one of the judges, and it's just kind of fun because some of the dancers are good and some of them, you know, and I always, you know, my personal feeling was, you know, that all these dancers work so hard to be seen, and then they would like to see dancers like in Dancing with the Stars who don't have any training. But, you know, that's just my personal opinion. But the idea that all of these mass dancers have backup dancers, so there is work and new work, and a lot of cable television has brought dancing, ideas of dancing, and then, oh, sorry, a bird just hit my window.
I heard that.
Yeah. So the idea that we have work is positive, and that's what I'm looking at. And ultimately, one of the things that I like to say is about the fact that the Academy Awards has no Oscar for choreographer, which is to me a big hole in our art form. I think just the fact that the society needs to value choreographers more. So there's an article here about what that means. And they had a dance director for 35, 36, 37. For 3 years, but the Directors Guild felt that there's only one director. So, and the
surprising.
Pardon?
It's surprising because they always have best song in a.
Well, you know, they have best makeup artist. Why shouldn't they should have, you know, like Mandy Moore in La La Land. I mean, there's some really great work. It needs Kenny Ortega. All of these choreographers need to be valued more. So this is one of the ways that we could just kind of up the visibility.
Mm-hmm.
So I look at, this is our job then, is to keep dance essential. How do we do that? And so these are some of the ideas. And I think that the fact that we had a pandemic and we have this moment, it's an opportunity for change. Do we want to keep dance the way it is? And so when we go back to it, do we really want it that way? Nah, we don't. We need to make those changes happen. I do, since this was for the teachers, I want them to remember that they are the essential frontline workers for dance. And every time they go out there and you know, there they are working their butts off with their kids. They're really giving us, you know, the okay that everything is good in terms of there are people, excuse my grammatical error there. There are people that love dance, and there are teachers who are offering then dance even in this moment, in the, you know, the nitty gritty of it, which is in that, I think that online Zoom is tough. So looking at who we are as artists, and this isn't just dance, of course, it's arts and the culture, meaning maybe marketing, you know, not just nonprofits, but, you know, commercials. And, you know, how many commercials have you ever seen that are creative that you actually want to see again? There are. So it's that idea that the arts are infused in our world financially. And if you look at it, we are 4.5% of the GDP, which is really amazing, 878 billion. So again, that's a big, broad picture. But I think it's kind of a reminder that we are part of this big picture, and we should be.
Yeah, and I'm just going to jump in. One of the things I've noticed in the arts that has really come alive is the idea of social and emotional well-being through the arts. And that was something
Yeah.
that was talked about, but not really taken seriously as it is in this moment, because what are the things that people still gravitate and still want and still seek out? And arts and culture is one of them. And even, for example, the inauguration was last week, and they couldn't do anything live. They couldn't have balls and whatever like they normally did, but they had musical performances and arts performances happening. So it's
Yeah.
the social and emotional piece is more important than ever, and it's really the one way we can keep connected with our students that's so meaningful.
Well,
So I think
who took really who really took over that inauguration was the young poet. You know,
right.
she made a splash, and I think, you know, we don't always think of poetry as being very mainstream, but it just
Yeah.
it shows you that it's our perception right now.
Mhm.
And the good news about what you just said about the inauguration was Washington Post came out with, oh, we've lost something. There's no inaugural ball. We don't get to see, you know, the first lady and the president-elect that just happened to be, you know, inaugurated in this moment gets to dance for us, that first dance. So it was kind of cool that that Washington Post, being a political animal, actually said that. So those are
They missed the dancing.
yeah, there are signs. So I've just got highlights of those changes that are happening in my lifetime. I have to say, and I love Carrie Couric. This isn't, you know, anything on her, but in the mid-90s, they decided to drop dance from the Academy Awards, and I just remember her saying she was thrilled about it. So yeah, well, I know. So it's this whole picture that has changing, and we go through cycles, and we're in an uptick right now. We're in a good cycle. So if we don't take the time to advocate for ourselves and really move on this and build what we want, then we're going to lose. So it's just to kind of see what is happening that shows this change. And one of the ways was New York stepped up. They have like open restaurants, and they have what they call now open culture, which so I don't know if it was a provision or a law or how the city works that, but they are allowing all sorts of arts to happen on the streets. It's kind of like pop-up culture maybe. But the fact that like it could be an opera, or it could be maybe a poem, a poetry reading, and maybe it could be a dance, and that they're going to figure out ways to make this happen. And I did see one, I forget who it was, but they were in tennis shoes because they were on concrete, but they were just so gorgeous. I think it was New York City Ballet actually. But anyway, the idea that to keep it relevant and to keep it in front of us and to connect with the people that you know, live in your community. So this was really cool that they felt that this was important, and they added a lot of money. So that's what makes it good, because what are you going to do? You're just going to give them unemployment, or are you going to make work happen? So this was very positive. In Paris, they were keeping the arts alive in the church. Now that's just one way, but they also have an institute that's nationally funded for choreography. So, you know, they give money that way. And there are grants like Quarantine Commission. So that's what it's called. So, you know, they understand the value of stepping up in this moment in time. You just can't leave it a void, and to actually continue to create. And so those are the moments that we're talking about. One of them also was in Miami. I know that they had a very wealthy sponsor. It was her idea kind of, and they accessed the idea of doing Nutcracker in the Park in December. Well, in Miami, you can do that. In Fargo, you know, North Dakota, it's harder. But it was maskless, so they created the logistics of getting on and off stage and how many dancers they could actually have. They worked with people who were, you know, COVID experts in terms of how to deal with that. So they added live action digital animation, which I thought was kind of fun, which it added, so there you are with kind of another art form. But they added then, instead of having a cast of, you know, like Ballet Loves, that big, you know, cast of 50, you know, willies dancing on stage, they have their own animation series that kind of fills out that core. Also, one Russian couple tried to do a Nutcracker in May. I don't know if they're going to be able to do that, but at this stage. They had reworked it so there was no intermission, a smaller performance, a smaller cast, no partnering, and they were going to allow 7% of the audience. So if, that's not financially feasible to continue, but it does bring the arts to the society and that city or area that they're living in. And you think of even the Super Bowl, they are allowing, I think it was 22,000 or something. So in a big stadium like that, they still have to consider how much audience they can really have. But the fact that we're trying to work it, to me, that's the positive. New things, instant ideas from Instagram collaboration, which was Ruby Morales, who I didn't really know. I learned who she was, but she wore wearable technology with the group Why Not? I guess Rocksteady, I'm going to show my ignorance here, but Rocksteady is the lead singer, I'm hoping. And they did this collaboration where her movement actually created the music, which I thought was really cool. So everybody's trying to find new, ways of being creative and problem solve.
I think that's one of the interesting things about the arts is that arts teachers are creatives, and we're all reimagining the work and the teaching in a way that we never had to before. We have to. Right. And I know when I think about going forward, what does next school year look like? I want to see if I can take what was good about the old ways of doing things and then the new ways of doing things, and maybe perhaps having a blend. Take the best of both.
The hybrid classes that exist right now are probably the most successful. And if you think about it, so you have maybe a student that comes in twice a week and then it rotates. So the rest of the time, if you take ballet, you're usually doing it 5 times a week. Maybe not in your high school dance, but so then they get to do it online for the other times. And so this kind of mixture, I think, is very successful. I just found out that College of the Desert is going to have all of ours online in the fall. So that was kind of disappointing. But it's not all of the colleges and all of the universities. They are reaching out and trying to actually solve the issue. And I'll show you later about University of Illinois. But anyway, Lemons to Lemonade is kind of that's very Scorpionic too, Miss Louisa and her other Scorpio sister. That's how I feel about you. Is that the choreographers are having to learn new skill sets, and that's kind of what you were saying. And mostly it's filming and solving then the lag in the internet in terms of like the music. There's like a lag technically. I'm not that technical person to explain it to you, but I do know one of the choral groups did it with FM. They put all their singers in a car and they listened to the FM band, and because it was an analog situation and not digital, they didn't have that lag. So I thought that was kind of cool. It's just, that's what you're saying. Everybody is problem solving and learning how to be creative in new ways. So this one that I saw was Swan Lake Bath Ballet. It was kind of interesting, but it was very hard and for the choreographer to actually manage. There was just a lot of logistical issues, but they had, their iPhone and, a plastic bag trying to put it in the water, it's a lot of fun things. I will say I'm old. I lived through video, first of all, when it was created, and FM, and so that moment where you technologically open up an area, it's a place where new artists can actually get seen and be visible. So there's an upside to the new technology too. One of the choreographers that I did listen to was in this article was, she said, I realized that editing is choreography. It's just in the film medium. But the same work of making choices that she does in the studio. And so I thought that was kind of an interesting observation. So I'm just going to put that out for those choreographers or teachers that don't want to, or, have felt reluctant and maybe they'd like to try it. And the other Lemon to Lemonade example that I just adored was this one man named McNamara, who was doing a piece. I think he got a commission, but he was listing to this background music while he was waiting for the unemployment connection, and it just looped it over and over again, and he ended up using that music for his piece, which that is a perfect example of Lemon's Lemonade. So still looking at the value of dance, it's like, how do we advance then this idea that arts are necessary? And we preach to the choir when we talk to other artists, and we understand this value, but it's in looking at the rest of the world. How do we look at the politicians? Donald Trump every year had eliminated the NEA. That was one of the ways he made his budget work. And we were lucky, all of the arts were lucky in that the congressional leaders decided that that was not going to happen. So that's a big deal to me, that, that we can even get our politicians on board in terms of how valuable and necessary the arts are. So that said, there is a community that is created then, and even in the online, it's a very unique community, but it's still there. It just kind of transcends geography, but it makes dance still visible. So that's a positive. The other positive is that they were looking at mental issues, and you kind of had referenced this, but that people are feeling so isolated, and those kinds of issues are really well expressed then through the arts, and teaching, children, whether, how old, gives them that ability to express themselves. So we understand that, but basically saying that in black and white becomes, I think, significant.
Well, we started an elementary program in Paris during the pandemic, and everything was done virtually for elementary students through dance. And it was the most fun ever to see the elementary teachers do the training, and were up and dancing, and new to dance and had to do it via Zoom. And then it went to the students, but it was a marvelous experience and very, very successful. And it was a school brand new to doing that. And I think there was a lot of trepidation, but then more openness because of what we were going through, looking for ways to make school fun and to engage students and get them to want to come to school. So it really was a positive, that importance of connectedness and self-expression. And the next thing I noticed you have is a fundamental human right. And that's, obviously a strong belief of mine that is your human right to have access to the arts, including dance. It's not just an extra for kids, it's part of their education. It's what they deserve.
And that's kind of what we're seeing, is that idea. Well, first of all, we understand the need to feel connected, but, and that ability to express themselves for children is vital. And it doesn't matter how we do it, what it is, because we have to kind of keep this lens that there's no judgment on it. And I think when we can do that, then we allow this uninhibited quality within the student to be, accessed and really nurtured. So I kind of go back to when I was a teaching artist. It was in third grade, or I think it was third grade, it doesn't matter. But this poor boy was going to have to be transferred to remedial schooling. And in this setting, we did something like, go from point A to point B. How many ways can you do a circle? And that kind of, an activity task. And he was the leader. He became, this wonderful guy who felt that his creativity and his kinesthetic ability was his multiple intelligence, right? So, and he runs up to his teacher after class, after this hour session, and he goes, I can't remember her name, but he goes, Miss whatever. He says, I know what I am now. I'm an artist. And I've never forgotten that because, I don't know that we always value. Maybe we don't see it in young students. I don't know. You're better at understanding that than I am. But I do think that we see it, at the need for it in schools, and we need to see it in society. And New York Times actually calls for an art stimulus, which is kind of like the New Deal. So I think it was WPA, I'm not, Works Progress something. Well, my history is showing. But it's the idea that we pay for that. And the guy at the time, you know, because Roosevelt's going, no, I don't know. And he goes, hey, you know, and I'm not going to remember his name. I think it was Scott, but I may be wrong. But he says, hey, artists have to eat too, you know. And it was like, it kind of was that moment where, you know, the money needs to flow all the way across the board. We need to build infrastructure. We need to do lots of things. And one of those is to create artistic moments for people to connect. So that's kind of it was neat that New York Times felt that importance. And then the other article was that there is an infrastructure that should happen. Unfortunately, it kind of comes to that feeling of socialism, but that's what it is. It's like this, because we want it inclusive in a society, are we willing to allow our taxes to go for art infrastructure? And, you know, my feelings is yes. So the other advancement of the arts, I think that's important, is keeping dance relevant. So the PSA of Wear a Mask was really a beautiful example of Alvin Ailey dancers wearing masks in their studio, in their performances. And it was just to remind the world that wearing a mask was important, but using dance to say that was, to me, you know, it was just vital. It was beautiful. The other thing that has happened is we see in social media, so much of the, you know, the viral videos that happen are dancing. And so that's new. That didn't used to happen. So video and technology has allowed, I think, that to flourish too. So these are all those ways that I think that we can, again, advance then the value of dance. So I've changed then, what are we going to do to access successes? Because I think we are looking at inventorying the things that do work. And this is just one example of the Department of Dance at University of Illinois actually has done, like you said, hybrid classes and how they made it work. And that was this year. So I'd like to see that be a more open program across the country. But if you want to see how they did do it, this is the links that will help you. So this is just kind of more nuts and bolts, the idea of how do we enhance our online teaching. And I like I said, I feel like the teachers are probably better at this than me, but I can assemble them the tools and the resources that might give us one place to look at what those resources could be. And one of the ideas was an FAQ page on your, most of the teachers do Canvas and stuff like that so that they have a way of posting, you know, pages. You know, it's hard because there's a lot of work that's going to get done when you're not face-to-face, even in the Zoom presentation. The other, I think, that is I started, for me personally, was doing more personal messages as a video. So that gives the students a little bit more of a one-on-one with you. And they feel like you're really there, and the student feels really there. Dances and documentaries on demand, you know, we get a chance to watch them, and they can, you know, actually integrate them into the lesson plans that way. And the asynchronous aspect offers the student then to do independent research. So hopefully they're going to have curiosity when they go to this page, and they're going to say, oh, look at this. Let's go, you know, let's see what this says. So those are some of the ideas that other experts brought in. These aren't just all mine. Video submission combinations, I did that, where I would ask, you know, for them to do these 2 counts of 8 in my jazz class, say. And then they submitted them, and it was interesting to see they all picked different places to do it. If they were in their bedroom, it was a little trickier because they had to like kick around the bed or the, you know, the bureau, the clothing bureau, or they would go outside. I had one that did it on her driveway, and it just was neat. One did it at a park. It was just kind of neat because I found their creativity in where they filmed themselves. So that was kind of fun. But I think, you know, sometimes maybe we have to shift in our focus. And for me, it was not as technical. So it was like, let's look at what we can do in terms of terminology. I can remember one student who had 4 years in school, and she did not know what a releve was. She knew it like a lift. So it was like, maybe we need to just kind of pinpoint those, that vocabulary so that we have clarity. And so it's just another way that works better in this online environment.
Well, you're pointing out a lot of great strategies, Shea, and I think one of the things that gets talked about a lot in education is, oh, there's going to be learning loss. And yes, there is going to be less of the traditional ways that we have taught, but there's all of these things that you're pointing out are continued learning. And, like for instance, from a visual art perspective, we didn't really have as much time to do art history and that type of component to what's happening, or we didn't have music theory as much as we would have liked to have. So it's like, this is really the year and a half where we can have students doing research, have video submissions, learn more technology, learn more, so I think of it as like, we won't lose our learning or ability to learn, which we could come out very strong on the other side of this. So I appreciate all of these suggestions.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of all even this whole kind of PowerPoint idea is just, it's our perception of not just what's out there, but of what we have and who we are. It's like just kind of, inventorying that we're really doing our job here, The other thing, because I went to, was online tutorials, and it was interesting. It actually helped because I'm an old woman. I do an ensemble, and it doesn't look the same as if some young, beautiful dancer does an ensemble. And so, I would find tutorials on how to do an ensemble, and then the student could actually look at that moment, and it's not very long. Usually sometimes it's short as 15 seconds, and they can actually study it. And so there was a better learning in terms of how, in terms of ballet, at least, how that movement should look and how to access that it's the back leg and it's going to brush and then you're going to jump and then you're going to come together. And it was like, because it's hard to do it in real time, to slow it down. So this was a way that online actually helped. And I put some of the ways that I liked it, which was the floor bar I like, and then the ballet workout. And these are, you can see it's all kind of skewed towards ballet. But Catherine Morgan has some really nice YouTube, and I really like her. She's a lot like Misty Copeland for me, because she had body image issues and was let go of Miami Ballet. So it's like, I use examples of who and what their life was like and why we should revere them. And so it's that whole kind of gestalt of not just one idea of that she's doing an ensemble, but that this is a woman who found a way to make lemonade again. And we know who Catherine Morgan is, and we might not know another dancer out of Miami Ballet. So good for her. Again, we're looking at the idea of community building. This is, to me, and accessing the successes of being online. One of the things that I did was, how are you feeling? That was like, it was kind of my attendance, but it was also, if somebody was really not doing well, you had that moment to connect, and you knew that maybe you wanted to reach out at a later time or whatever. And so, and they also had to then be creative about, expressing that emotion. And sometimes the thing that's great about dance is that there's not necessarily a word, and so then the emotion or the music or the art, for the visual artist, gives you that expression that maybe words are lacking. Personal corrections, that's a tough one, because, do you want the other students to hear it? Do you want to do it? I used to do it when they gave me their videos, and I would actually, on Canvas, you have this place where you can make your remarks. And that's where I'd say, well, if you could just point your toes on this moment, So, and that way it wasn't a broad picture where everybody was hearing, the correction or whatever. Because I think that there's a need for more sensitivity, and I'm saying that without backup, without scientific evidence. But just on a personal level, I felt like students are more sensitive being visible individually like that in those Zoom pictures.
I think that's fair. I think one of the things in teaching we've struggled with is teaching to a lot of, blacked out cameras, just the name, because students don't necessarily want you to see their bedroom or their house or what's happening in the background and so forth. So that's a challenge to teach too, because you don't have the interaction of the face and what's happening.
But if they have to, like, if they have to do a video, a dance video, then you can make that connection then. So, because I allow them to blank in mine anyway.
Well, I think you have to.
Oh, absolutely. But it's also just like, because you're in one room and maybe there's children and the dogs and you know what I mean? It's
a privacy issue.
So anyway, there's an online discussion component, and I teach in a private studio, and we actually are like 10 students in a big room. And so to add an online discussion component brings a sense of community, and individual reflection becomes, I think, very valuable. Alternative spaces outside, again, like if it's in the park or in your driveway. But the other way I think that builds community, and this is more like you were saying in terms of theory, is the idea of universal shapes. And every culture has shapes that they utilize, and you as a visual artist understand this, and it's not that much different in dance. But it's like if I do a round dance, like the ghost dance in the Paiute Nation was a circle. It was a sense of continuity that the living and the dead, there is no break. There is no sense of where it starts and where it ends. It's just a circle. So those are ideas that are more intellectual, but I think they're kind of fun, because you can also then ask, your students to be creative and do their own, and what those shapes might mean to them. So that was just kind of an idea that I kind of threw out there in terms of community building.
Sounds good.
One of the things that I saw was Twyla Tharp was on the show. I'm thinking of her name, Martha. Martha.
Graham?
Martha Stewart. It takes longer sometimes for those little runs to work through. But anyway, she was on Martha Stewart show, and Martha was like, well, what's choreography, and so she said, okay, take out all your change in your coin purse. And so she dumped it on the table, and she says, okay, now organize it. And, most people would put it like a quarters together and the dimes and the nickels. And she goes, that's fine. And I forget now what Martha actually did, but it was that Twyla Tharp moment where she said, okay, but what if you built the coins until they were a sculpture, and then why don't you put two over here and one over there, And so she used the coins as the metaphor for a physical dancer, and, the shape of the dancer being a wider quarter as opposed to a tinier dime. And it was really it just struck me as being a choreographer that what a great way to teach what we do. And so anyway, that's something that we could all kind of learn from also. That's going back to what tools are the same. It was a good segue, sort of. But I think that the best tools that we have, including being online, is that we are the experience, and the student is learning. And that moment of what teacher to student can give is way bigger than just the knowledge of what your subject is, but the knowledge of life, knowledge of what to do about things and how to approach. It's such a bigger picture. So it's that idea that dance for me is a metaphor for life, that you don't want to give up, that you want to keep trying, that you want to practice, that you want to find the dance that you like. And it's like all those kinds of things are the same for me. So how we have modified them, how we reach out to that student maybe, but I think the idea that we need to let students know that all of this is still learning. It's like maybe we're not doing pliés at the bar, but we're still teaching. It's like, we kind of hit on this already, but it's that idea that there's a lot of learning, that what I would call soft learning, and it's still there. It's very important.
Soft skills, yeah.
Yeah. So the new tools, it was interesting to hear from the teachers, because they gave me a lot of information about the technology that I didn't know. I think it was Flipgrid or something like that was one of them.
Mm-hmm.
And just, yeah, they were just saying all the different kind of programs that can be used. So the virtual digital programs, platforms there's a lot of them that can help you do your job. The virtual performance, we've seen a lot of people come to that. I think you get, the Zoom fatigue happens, so we kind of might consider that our performances might be shorter, our classes might be shorter, all those kinds of ideas that we want to just kind of hit it. We don't want it to fall asleep. Live stream is another way that we can function. Dance performance installation, which is kind of interesting, because I've always wanted to do dance in an art gallery, and and I see it happening. So that's kind of fun. And then also the actual dance performance becomes an installation. Site specific is kind of fun. It's kind of like the flash mob or the trolley dances in Riverside or in San Diego.
Mm-hmm.
Those kinds of ideas are fun. So we might, do that with our own students. Digital photography and film is kind of augmented than dance, because we're seeing it in this medium. How do you take and translate 3-dimension into 2-dimension? And there's some phenomenal examples of that. Again, I'm just going to comment synchronous, asynchronous, hybrid. I think the hybrid is the best. That's just my personal. How we've expanded our creativity. I love this one because it just struck me. It was one of my ahas. But the fact that we're making everybody understand proprioception and understanding what 6 feet feels like from you as an individual to the next person, it's kind of fun.
I don't know if you recall that story that the one teacher shared with us about. She had a student that had to work within the limits of a bunk bed, and
Right.
that he did his dance, and he was contending with that limited space, that he had height, but he didn't have side to side. So I thought that was really interesting. And
Yeah,
she thought maybe it wasn't that good. And she's like, no, it's brilliant, what you were able to do.
Yeah, it's like when you look at a TikTok dancer, they're having to do it in this little screen,
Sure.
And that's very different than the 6 feet. I'm really looking at the mask and the society things for the, the COVID, that we all have to be 6 feet distance from each other. So it's like we have to find how do non-dancers figure out that 6 foot distance. And we see reminders all the time. But again, like you were saying, that small spaces or, the axial movement, when you look at axial is just whatever happens with the body as being the center of the movement without traveling. And so there's a lot of TikTok dances that are really in that vein, in that avenue. So that's kind of fun. And then my last thought, which is how my second line under the inventory, what works is that the arts are the tools for society. Understand the world. How do you process what is going on? And by connecting with someone else's thoughts or seeing another point of view that you never thought of, all of those things, that's the arts, and that they all work to our advantage. And just to remind us that the function of art is catharsis, and that, thank you, Aristotle. But I think we forget, and I say that maybe I should say I. The challenges are there, but we can work through them, and you know what? They don't have to be perfect. We understand that that individual attention on Zoom is hard, but I did it, and I put the other people in a breakout room, and they could work on their own, and they helped each other with maybe creating movement vocabulary, or maybe I want them just to do a count of 8, and I want an axial movement, a locomotor, and, that kind of thing. And so it was fun, that, and while they were doing that, then I could work one-on-one. Now it is very time consuming, but that's just the challenges. Maybe you do 2 people this week, 2 people next week, and you really focus on it differently. So those are all individual decisions. These are just, again, thoughts that I'm throwing out. Nobody has to do them, but you can, look at them and make your own decision about it. I think doing corrections where others can view it is the real, that for me is a challenge that I don't care for. The other thing that I did was a weekly, instead of a written journal, they did a dance journal. So maybe they did 30 seconds every week, and I gave them then the parameters of, they could be improvisation, it could be self-expression, which is kind of the same thing, but not necessarily, right? Because then, so they'd have to distinguish, and then the documented technical prowess. So maybe I had them just show me, their tendus or whatever. But the idea that weekly moment gives you a point A to a point B at the end of the semester or the end of the year, where you can see and document then their changes. Because I'm one of those that when I grade, I look, especially when we were doing like beginning ballet, say, and I had students that had been 10 years in ballet were taking beginning, because in college that's kind of the way it works. So I decided that I would take a student from point A to point B, and what did they do from point A to point B, and how much did they improve? That was what I looked at. So it was an individual judgment in terms of how much they progressed, and that was how I graded. So that's just kind of an idea to help with that. Group activities I think are really tough, but I think you could work in pairs, and again in your breakout rooms, maybe they do mirroring, maybe they do those ideas where they can work together to create an 8 count or something of that nature, or so that's one of the ways. The other way is in the Zoom picture is an accumulative dance where maybe you ask them something that they did over the weekend, and they have to find a gesture, and so then you add the gestures. So then you start with the first student and the second student, so you constantly build, and you have to kind of rehearse again the original ones. You have to find a rhythm, and it's kind of interesting because that's how you really process learning to dance. I always use the metaphor of it's like reading, or writing a book. You start with a couple of letters and you put it together and you make a word, and then the word makes phrases, the phrase makes clauses, the clauses make sentences, the sentence makes paragraphs, the paragraphs makes chapters, the chapters makes a book. It's like if you tried to do a book in one sitting, you fail. And so it's that idea of taking each chunk until you understand it, until you process it, until you you memorize it, you put it in your body, whatever. And that's how, that was usually my first.
We did that with elementary students,
Yeah.
where they would just chunk it and put something together in breakout groups, and that was really successful. I just want to give you about a 10-minute warning, Shea. I don't know how far along we are versus slides. Just wanted to.
Okay. No, we're okay.
We might go a little faster. So.
I know I'm probably more into it, right? Anyway, it was just the idea that the lesson was usually the first day where they had to learn how do they learn? They learned how to memorize. They don't know how to do it. So that for me was just an example. But the dance and video versus live dance, I think, is a great discussion. How is it different? And again, you're going to look at proprioception, and you're going to look at those ideas of theory and structure and the whole map of your dance. So those are the ideas. The other that I wanted to say in terms of career is the necessity of accessibility today. So finding those descriptions, those audio descriptions of the dance are rare right now. So that's an area that maybe a dancer might want to go into, someone from one of your students, particularly in high school, might consider. Protocol, again, those are your challenges. What are you going to do when there's no internet? Okay, so this one could be a whole lesson plan right here, this one, dance and social justice. But it was the idea that dance is the culture of, how should I have someone at my door, I'm sorry. Recognize all dance is cultural, meaning that it does reflect a moment in time in that culture. So it's like ballet was that moment in time that Louis XIV lived. So there was nobles and they were very, and you can see ballet still has that quality. If you look at hip hop, it came, out of the Bronx. So that idea and the anger that kind of suffuses underneath, and the angular movement, they all support the anger. Those are, subtleties that exist within a dance, and to recognize that all dance is cultural.
Well, and I just want to jump in here real quick and say one of the initiatives in our county is anti-racism. And how does that apply in all curricular areas, including the arts? Yeah. So, like, for instance, the one title that we have up there is Ballet Race. This is a relatively provocative statement. And so I just want to point out that this is sensitive and challenging work when we look at our own currently held beliefs, what's happening in the world today, how can we move the conversation along? So for some people, that might catch you off guard and you might think, well, that's what, so I think, I've been in teaching almost 30 years. I know Shea's been in dancing a long time, and these things evolve. And so what we know evolves. So we're going to throw up some examples here, and it's not that we're presenting a right or wrong answer. It's a conversation and it's ongoing. So pop in there.
It's this moment of controversy of, do we keep then the historic accuracy of this ballet, or do we upgrade it? And because do we want to continue, say, a stereotype? And some of the dances in terms of the Nutcracker, say the tea dance was one of those where they changed it to the Chinese dragon dance, which was a part of their culture, and it made it work better than this this appropriation by the white.
Yeah, something more a stereotype. And I also think that, we as teachers need to be really sensitive and mindful of our students and our students' cultures and so forth. So this is a real revolution in a way in teaching, and it was really brought, like I said, social and emotional wasn't talked about in the arts as much as it is now. When I meet with the other leads in the state, it's constantly talked about. And the same thing with what's happening with equity and social justice when the arts, when everything erupted after the death of George Floyd, this really came to be front of mind in a way that it wasn't before. So absolutely. Like I said, I want to acknowledge that for some people it is really a journey, and some of the concepts that we were pointing out today might seem very strange and very new to you, but it is an ongoing conversation in education that's very present and very important going forward.
Well, the one that you see at the bottom of the page, not quite the bottom, the second to the bottom, he just says that this is what art is. And so the discussion, do you actually respect the memory of the original work, or do you upgrade it? So, there's a lot of different opinions about it. Lindsay Winship right above it says that it's a living, breathing art form. It's not like you can paint the picture and put it in the closet until everybody's ready for it. So, it's because it is in the moment and it does have time as an element, it becomes, I think, a very critical issue, and nobody solved it. We're just discussing this. So this one is an article, and it might be a great place to start. And it was this one dancer who was with the Stats Ballet, and she was the only Black dancer in the company. So it was her experience. And then it personalizes it, but it's also just, it was hard. And that the article gave us ways to, how do we bring the companies up to an idea of inclusivity. And so the create awareness, I mean, that's a big, no big deal. We get it. I mean, it is a big deal, but I mean, it's like, it's a non-brainer, yeah.
That's a great resource. And I think the idea, for our students is, it's not about fitting in, it's about belonging. And are we creating that sense of belonging with our students in the choices that we make as teachers, and the things that we present, the dances that we do, that we're mindful and we're making conscientious decisions.
Absolutely. I think that's a wonderful way to say it. And I will finish then this page in terms of art above all, not important. And that's what we have to really do, is change the idea that it's about people and that the people should come first. But the one thing about ballet that I will say is that there was so few jobs that there was always this, hey, you should be grateful that you're, you know, got to work, you know, you got a job, you're actually working, blah, blah, blah. And so you are afraid to come out when things are wrong. And you're afraid to say or to speak up when you have had an experience. So I think that is part of that conversation. And I think most students can understand that. And that might be a great opening conversation for a student, for a teacher to ask the students. Maybe they've had personal experience. Anyway, this was kind of neat because they were the quotes by some famous people that how they felt about it. And almost everybody is saying, you know, there are new ways of doing that actually address it. It's just that you have to put your problem solving skills on it. And so that's kind of what they're saying. Misty Copeland is really out there saying that this idea of race and racism in ballet is for her more important than even her career as a dancer. She's writing a book on Black ballerinas. And I said this before that, if I said to you who was the first Black ballerina, you might not know. And it was Janet Collins, who was 1951, was the Metropolitan Opera Ballet. So that's part of the conversation, is that we don't have the history, we don't have all of that. We don't have the full picture. There's just kind of a narrowing there of ideas. So she just basically says that we need to actually even rethink what audience do we want and how we reach out as a presenter, as a theater or whatever. So how we reach out, and this is a bigger picture than just with your teachers, but it's part of the whole conversation. These are ideas that I had for just for those conversations in terms of dance history. And one of them was how many people thought about guns and point shoes together. You know, I mean, that's not something you'd think about. So this ballet was actually done when Nixon was there. And it was the idea that the Chinese had taken on ballet and really wanted to make it work. But there's this resistance, and it's kind of, it happens over and over again in cycles historically, but they didn't think that the Chinese could do ballet. It was like that kind of prejudice was there. And so this is kind of an interesting picture if you want to look at those ideas. The acrobatic troupe, which is who they are culturally. I mean, what happens in dance is we see a fusion constantly creating new styles and evolution of dance. So here we have the culture that would do acrobatics and everything from martial arts to actually to sing and music. But they take then the acrobatic troupe, this one link is for Swan Lake, and they take it, and I love it because she's doing, this one beautiful ballerina is doing a penché on top of her partner's head on point. He's like, her point shoes right here on his head, and she does a promenade, which means she does like a 360 where she turns, and it's incredible. So it's something to look at and to see how cultures take an art form and make it their own. The Four Swans was because they take the four swans and make them frogs, and they do basically hip hop. And hip hop is more about being on the upper body rather than the lower body like ballet is. Other examples is This Is America. I adore that video because it has so much symbolism and it opens the door to conversation about race in America and how we experience it. And so, and who doesn't like Donnie Glover? And so kids too like that idea of hip hop, and the distraction of dance is, well, dance is that idea of distraction in our society. Alvin Ailey, Revelations, that's a perfect example of what happened out of the civil rights movement. It was this idea that we needed a sense of pride in who we are. And that was 59, 60, in that moment in time. He brought something so poignant that Revelations is still considered a masterpiece today. So that's another conversation where you can look at the history of that moment and still see it in today. An Arab Street Urchin, I love this one because it's just a short little video, but it shows a young boy doing a freeze, and he's doing everything that you'd see in a hip hop dance today. He's doing spins on his head, and it's from 1898. So it's kind of fun that there isn't anything new necessarily. We just bring it up to date. Options for turning professional. This is a whole nother turn, like a right turn in our conversation, but it's this idea of how do we make this moment happen for a student that wants to go on professionally, and knowing that there's 75% less work right now. That's tough, but there's still work. You know, just like we were saying, the mass dancer has background dancers. But so this one gentleman, Laney, or I'm not sure it's a woman, Laney, I don't know. There you are, gender bias, Shea, of Block Agency. Anyway, she says that that you should be ready personally. So it takes.
And I was just going to jump in here and say 75% less work right now, not forever.
Not forever. That's the whole point. It's like, so if you're not staying in shape, you won't be ready when that moment comes. And I think that's the lesson here. So all of this, you know, it's like being mature is an asset. This was from an agent. And so go to college and learn. I have one of my students is in New York University, and she's studying with Alvin Ailey's school, and she's happy as a lark. So there are ways to make the moment work. Breaking is in the Olympics. I think that's very exciting. So we're going to see how that changes the art form, but it also brings, it's an equalizer force that, you know, there's so many break dancers that are not necessarily technically trained. They're just good at what they do. They know how to do it. They've understood their bodies. So they've learned it in a very organic way, and they have a lot to teach us. And so that may be where a breaker goes and equalizes then this importance of ballet in this artificial art form of whiter people, as opposed to, and it shouldn't be, I didn't mean it that way, but I mean in this tradition of when it was in Louis XIV court. So it's like this moment to bring in an art form that is right out of the Bronx. So it's exciting in a way that it's new and it's fresh, and you can like just create what you want right here in terms of what the art form is going to look like. TikTok dancers, hey, and dance influencers, they're making money, you know, and probably more than the actual dancer that's hired for, you know, in terms of commercials. It's a tough, that's a tough job in terms of financially being supporting you. It's not, it's usually you're gonna have to do another job, but the joy of being in a video, a music video or whatever, or on a commercial, those are exciting ways to be visible. And it really depends on the student, what they wanna be, if they wanna be in a company or if they wanna have that commercial exposure. I think that the dance reel is the most important option at this point for any student, which means they're gonna put together their best in terms of a 1 or 2 minute piece that can go to different agencies and different productions. Right now, they were looking for the Marvelous Miss Maisley. They were looking for dancers for that, and so they were advertising on Facebook. But it was like through Answers for Dancers and Backstage and Casting Frontier. Those are all ways to submit yourself to those kinds of projects. So it's like just learning what's out there that you can actually access to actually help you get work. Okay, moving forward. Maybe, I don't know where our time is, but we don't need to go.
We're actually kind of out of time. How many more slides do we have?
With the moving forward conclusions and then the last quote. So it's just, I'm going to show the Dance for Social Change Festival because that's for students from the 9th grade to seniors, and it might be an interesting moment to come together with people from all over. I don't know when that's going to be, and if it's actually going to be virtual or not. But they were just saying that the big pictures are value the programs that work. Teaching artists might be your teaching assistants because they're going to need work. Pop-ups, performance workspace that is rentable to others. Grants, and they're saying that maybe that our funders need to support those people who figure out a way to support others. So there's just new ways of thinking about it that will help us, you know, equalize then where the monies go. Do we want to build new companies, or do we want to strengthen big institutions? Do we want to offer tax breaks for those companies that start? I think all of these things are valid. They're just all conversation at this point, but they're necessary because we need to be able to figure it out. And who's going to tell a politician but a dancer or an artist what to do? The other thing that I will say is Ratatouille was a musical that was considered an what they call the proof of concept concert. So it didn't really exist, but all these people kept saying, gee, if you did it as a musical, I can see this scene and we're going to create it like this. And this person did this. And they put it together and they created this musical. It was never done before like this. And it made $1 million. They raised $1 million, and that was for the Actors Fund. So there's such positives. Okay. Live arts may resume in the fall. Yay. We're hoping for the best. Gotham Gazette is a great article on how we restructure, basically socialistic kind of way of restructuring how to bring dance into the conversation politically and societally. Dance New York City Symposium is March 17th through the 20th. So basically, these are all ways to really think about what's important. And I think that dance will be different after the pandemic is over, is like really critical. It's already different now. Why would it, you know, do we want it to go back? No, you can only go forward. So these are good things. Also, I would say in terms of support to help each other as an artist, as a teacher, to optimize your own well-being and to make good financial support decisions. Maybe since you are working as a teacher, you can support, you know, the whatever art organization you think is valuable. Okay, that said, this is my lovely, lovely, I call it the 4 Ps because I just love this, this quote, and it's, I don't know this dancer, but I just adored it. Dance is a magical melting pot of poetry, protest, and prayer. It is the voice of empathy that connects all of humanity without frontiers of geography, religion, gender, or society. It is a living manifestation of the freedom of the soul. And I wish I'd said it, but she did, and it was lovely. So I just think that to remind us of the importance of what we do. So.
Thank you, Shea. I really so appreciate your time and expertise in putting this presentation together. And because we recorded it just you and I, you know, it's kind of a wide-ranging conversation in a sense, but it's specific to dance. And sometimes, you know, there are 5 art forms and many wonderful teachers in our county, but we really want to present things that are specific to what you do every day. And so we have a lot of love and appreciation and respect for the teachers that are boots on the ground doing this work day in and day out with students. So thank you for watching. And
well, I would just say this, one more thing, dance teachers are they're like the only one maybe at the school. So we do feel isolated at times, and to bring us together as a community, we are grateful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Louisa.